You look beautiful. You have to unmute. I was scared that I was gonna like connect to the wrong one, or that I like last minute I wouldn't find the Zoom.
Yeah, I wanted to hop on early just to kind of make sure sound is all working good and recordings are working. Hi, Sarah.
Hey there.
How are you?
Hey.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you for asking. I'm so amped for this today.
Me too.
Okay, I am just gonna make sure.
What time is it for you, Sarah?
It's 6 o'clock.
Okay, same for me.
Awesome. It's so nice to see everyone rolling in. Sarah, where are you actually located? I forgot to ask you.
I'm in Germany.
Okay, amazing. I love being able to connect with people in like such wildly different places all over the world. Rebecca, you're in Florence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
At the moment, yeah.
Amazing. What are you guys up to this week outside of obviously this session?
Launching a client site, recording 100 million Loom videos.
Yeah.
Connecting like all my clients who've been delaying for months, all of a sudden they like need the domains connected this week.
Yeah. How relatable is that? Hi, Xanthi.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going so well. How are you doing?
I'm well. Just hanging out, you know.
Just
it's nice
hanging
to have a
out.
little break in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
How's everyone else doing?
Totally. We're doing good. Thank you so much for making time in your busy schedule. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm happy. It's good. It's like we actually, because we're in Canada right now, and so we have Friday is a holiday here, and then but also we're going to the States over the weekend, which is a holiday on Monday too. So we have like a 4-day weekend. So I feel like I'm kind of like getting into the mode of like, you know, not doing as much this week so that we can ramp up for taking some time off, which is nice.
Totally. Yeah, getting into the Zen mind state. I totally feel
Yeah.
I told my team, I was like, we have to have everything wrapped up end of day Wednesday because I want Thursday to be Zen because it never is on those shorter weeks, you know, it just never ends up that way.
Oh, I know. And most of the time it's like rushed, like, but I feel like because of that, we were just like more conscious this time of not taking on too much at the, like during this current start of the month, which is nice.
Totally. Cool. I'm just going to check in and see if Tippling is going to join. And so I'll just go on mute for a second. Okay. Not to be the awkward turkey, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone we had planned to speak is actually here before we kick off, especially Tippling, because she was going to be one of the first people I asked questions to, but we'll just kind of roll with it naturally as things kind of go. So kind of as people are joining, everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for making some time in all of your busy schedules. I am so amped for the conversation today. This has been on my mind for quite literally months. I had sent out an email and Instagram stories back in November, I think it was, before life around the holidays got insane and the real seasonal affective disorder of Canada winter really set in and derailed those plans initially. So I'm so excited that we're now here and it's kind of all coming to fruition at the exact right time. That's what I'm trying to tell myself anyway. So if you are kind of new here to this community, you don't know who I am. My name is Leia Gucciardi, and I am the creative director of Arc Design Studio based in Toronto. I have been a web designer and developer and project manager and multi-talented person for the last 12, almost 13 years. And I have been just dying for a community kind of online that goes in depth a little bit more about collaboration. I feel like collaboration has been a bit of a buzzword this year, and everyone is touting that it's the year of collaboration. But I don't really see anyone diving into the topics of, the humanness behind what collaboration actually means, the messiness that can come with that, but also the beauty, because in my 12 years of experience, I have actually done so much work as a developer for other designers, agencies that are Fortune 500 names, small mom and pop shops. I've been the designer working with other developers, and I've been kind of on every side of the relationship. And honestly, it's my opinion that collaborating with other creatives or techies is probably the most underrated thing that you can do in your business. I don't know how we got to this point, especially in the online space where like signing your own clients and doing everything full service has become such a symbol of success, and kind of like hiding the people who actually, are collaborators on projects, especially if you're in the space that most of us are in, where you are small and that's part of your power. So I wanted to kind of invite people from a bunch of different perspectives up to talk about this more intimately today. And I'm so excited to introduce them all. I'm actually going to get them to introduce themselves while we kind of go through this conversation. And when we get to kind of the end of the conversation, wherever it kind of takes us, we will have some breakout rooms, and I'll explain the format of that so that everyone can kind of participate. So if you are in the audience, if you can just kindly keep yourself muted, just so that we don't, interrupt a really important thought that our speakers are going to have. So just some community guidelines, because this could be a very tenuous space to play in, right? That's probably why no one has ventured in this area before, because collaboration can be a bit of a sticky subject. So I want you to remember everything you're about to hear today comes from the perspective of 4 women who have their own unique lived experience. They may have their own underlying struggles, mental health battles, neurodivergence, trauma, situational nuance that they don't feel comfortable, broadcasting to the whole group in this context. And you don't have the context behind, and we don't have time to unpack it all. So I want to remind everyone that to make this a safe space with, helping people reveal the humanness of their experiences as business owners and humans, with the intention of creating a meaningful and genuine connection. It's not your place to offer kind of your, solutions to the interesting problems that you're going to hear them uncover. Okay. So if you want to use the chat to chime in as someone who's watching, because you may have found something insightful or relatable, please, react to the conversation as it unfolds. But I would ask you to please avoid commenting on how you would handle a situation or your tips, no matter how well-meaning it actually might be, because you may be bypassing this person's lived experience and point of view. Okay. So for our fireside chat guests, because we only have approximately 30 minutes to talk, and I don't want to take up all the air in the room, I want to be the least person to talk this entire time. There's also 4 of you, so much ground to cover. Everyone who is speaking has their questions prepared in advance. We may not get to every, question I have for you as the conversation unfolds. And I know myself with an ADHD brain, I tend to go on tangents unintentionally. So if I kind of want to, guide the conversation along, I might do just a very kind flash of my microphone, private DM to you, or, just nudge you, interrupt your thought to kind of move it along. I promise to try and make it the most anti-Oscar orchestra way possible. But if you have thoughts that have left unsaid, I actually intentionally split you all up into different breakout rooms. So I encourage you to kind of keep your unfinished thoughts to maybe spark conversation in that room if you're finding it's a little bit of a cold one when you hop in. So a topic left fully unexplored just means we'll have to get back together and do this again in the future. Or it's an invite from you as viewers to go and engage with other people or that speaker specifically and, DM with them and create that connection. So we're going to go through a couple of broad topics. We may not get through all of them, but the first one I want to talk about specifically is on attracting and signing clients and tippling. Just because I haven't had a full chance to go through everyone who's here. Are you here today? Are you able to unmute?
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Awesome. Okay, amazing. So tippling, if you can just introduce yourself to the audience here, give me kind of like a one-liner of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Hi. Yes. So my name is Tippling. I live in the Salt Lake City, Utah area, and I do website development primarily for e-commerce-based businesses. And so I focus a lot on strategy and optimization and just building websites overall.
Awesome.
Mostly on Shopify.
Amazing. Okay. So you can kind of see why I invited her to this conversation with a developer perspective. I love that. So I wanted to open up the discussion about attracting and signing clients as a designer or developer. And something that we kind of like talked about in our DM conversations that you had a spicy take on, I'm so excited to open this up this way, is I have found, and I'm sure most of you can agree, it's more common than not for developers to be brought on as secondary to a designer, studio, or agency, because designers tend to be able to more easily sell these services. We're humans, we're very naturally visual creatures. Especially when it comes to design, that is just how marketing ends up coming to life. However, there is a pattern of sometimes designers, agencies risking overselling their capabilities or taking on clients that are a bit beyond their wheelhouse or hugely underestimating scope and cost, especially as designers who quote unquote want to offer more custom sites, more design freedom. So tippling, you had this hot take on designers selling themselves as full service, design and development, and not bringing your developer in early enough. Can you tell us why, as a developer, you sometimes value working directly with the client or the designer, and why they should consider you as more part of the process of signing and attracting clients?
Definitely. Yeah. So my path here kind of is a little bit different in that I started out in marketing and moved into development. I was never a designer, but so I kind of have that marketing mindset up front. And what I've just found is that it puts more pressure on the designer to sell yourself as also the developer, because now you are responsible for not only the look, but the actual functionality of the website. You're responsible for the build time. You're responsible for like if it works or not. What if something breaks? What if it's not, functioning how they need it? The integrations. There's so much that goes into the back end of a site that to put that on the designer is just more pressure, I think, than necessary, or than that will allow you to do your job well. So what I found that works really good is when we get a client that wants a website, we usually have a discussion of like the designer talks to them about, what is the branding, the look and feel, everything visual to do with it. And then as a developer, I come in and talk about, okay, what do you actually need it to do? Like, what's the functionality that you need? What are the special elements that you want in a website? What, platform discussion, if that's necessary, which some designers can have, but there are so many little things on the back end that a developer is probably only going to think about, and then a designer maybe not, if they're not experienced in building, that we can address them up front before the website's even sold, to make sure that there's not these surprises along the way. And at the same time, I actually think designers can make more money if they sell their design. So whether that's branding or branding plus website, so let's just say website. If you could sell a design for a website, I feel like you can charge more, because then you say, okay, and now this is the separate cost of building the site. And I have found that most designers I work with end up being able to make more money by selling them as separate services versus one.
Love that. I love that you've made that a win-win for everyone. That's amazing. So that is sometimes a bit of a sticky subject because it's not always a perfect scenario where, a project comes across your desk as a designer. And when you get on the phone call with the client, you get to talk to your potential developer before you have that initial conversation. And you might have already talked about price and have some sort of ceiling or threshold to work with. So coming from both sides of the relationship, I always recommend that you create those relationships for a development partner for the potential possibilities of people you may be attracting before you have that lead in your inbox. It doesn't always work out that way. But if you were in that situation, Tippling, when you're talking to a potential designer you might work with and they ask you about pricing, how do you explain to them without being patronizing that without speaking directly to the client, who is the lead, or seeing a mock-up, price is really difficult to define sometimes. Do you work in specific ranges, or, tell me your thoughts on setting pricing as a developer when you have so many risks and so much that is unknown?
Definitely. So just from my years of experience, I've been able to almost productize it, not completely, but in a way that I can say like, okay, this type of site with this specific functionality, I'm going to estimate at this amount. Like this is the starting point. I have a minimum just for like my studio that I will charge to do a site no matter what it is, just to make it worth my time. But outside of that, I have put together kind of buckets where I say like, okay, this site with this functionality will start at this. This type of site with this functionality will start at this. And you kind of upsell as I go. So like if say they want a Shopify site and the client's like, yeah, I just want a Shopify site. I'm like, okay, well, here's like the basics, like what it starts with. It starts with, the homepage and product page template and like everything else that's in fonts and colors. And they're like, okay, great. And then the next one may be like, okay, homepage, product page, custom collection page, and I want like product stickers or something like it just like moves up. So I kind of have an idea of like what the like pie in the sky would be, and then what like kind of paring it down would be at different stages. So I've established that with a designer beforehand. So like if a client says, this is my budget, they can be like, okay, before we even get into the nitty gritty, this is like minimum what you're looking at. And so I found that has worked really well to at least give them a starting point. Because a lot of times people just want to know, like, what's a starting point for a website?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And pricing is such a hard topic because, chatting money can be a bit triggering to some people based on like their individual lived experience. Rates can also be so individualized because every service provider has their own unique, experience, risk tolerance, their own financial situation, and the types of clients that they attract, right? So sometimes it's unavoidable that you may have someone come across your proverbial inbox you might be desperate to work with, but budget-wise, it might not kind of line up with your minimum engagement, that kind of like base rate number that you had kind of mentioned, Tippling. So I wanted to actually introduce Rebecca, who's the next person I want to call up to speak on this topic. Rebecca, if you can unmute. Could you introduce yourself to the group with just like a one-liner about you and what your experience is?
Yeah, so I'm a designer developer based currently in Florence, Italy, but usually between London and Italy. And we work with directly our own studio clients, providing full service holistic design from conceptualizing all the way to design and development of websites. But we also have a second part of the business that is us or Studio Kanuka as a developer for other designers.
Amazing. Thank you. So we had kind of talked. Oh, Amy, if you can just mute your microphone, please. Thank you. We had talked in our DMs previously that, being flexible is, can be a really great way to create those opportunities where maybe budget is kind of something that is only the misaligned thing in the potential that comes across your desk with working with a designer, developer, or a client. And I think that sometimes we miss those opportunities where we can create that meet in the middle offer that works best for both the provider and the client, and also opens the opportunity for that longer term partnership. So I love that you've created this approach to being flexible with the designers you've worked with and finding ways to offer a container that fits their budget, their unique skills and offering, while also respecting your own boundaries in the unique way you kind of operate your business. So I would love if you can tell us a little bit about the intensive approach that you've taken with designers like Abby from Wayfair Design Studio. If you have been, cleared to talk about that in depth. I'm sure that some designers and developers here don't even know that this is even an option for them to explore. So can you kind of tell us a little bit more about that?
So the relationship with Abby actually started last year. She reached out to me to work on a couple of full projects. And I think for us, that was key. We kind of set the relationship, the way of communication, what we were capable of, that we worked well together. But from there, she reached out to me and was like, hey, would I be interested in working together on some kind of retainer basis? But through our conversations, it became really clear that I couldn't define the scope of what will be included because she couldn't define the scope of what she'd be needing me for. So we had, by that stage, because of the project we'd done in the past, a good understanding of the way we work together, what we could do. She focuses mainly on Shopify and Squarespace, which is the same as me. So that was a great foundation. We are both have a very similar way of coding and organizing. Also, our aesthetic, the way we communicate and try to organize our timelines works well. So the best way that we decided to do this was a design intensive, which was kind of adapting my standard design intensive approach of having a prioritized to-do list, but making it work for Abby and for me. So each month should have different projects. What should need me to work on one week might be totally different for the next week. Some things could be, a task one task could take 3 hours, or next time I could do like 10 in 3 hours. So we needed something flexible. So we came up with the idea of, I gave her a few options, but it worked out best that she would rather have me a couple of times throughout the month for less hours. So we do a couple of half days, and typically it's on a day that she is not focusing on client work. So she's doing her own like internal business stuff. So she's on hand if I do need to run something past her. But we have a check-in each month. On the Monday of the week we're doing it, ideally we have the to-do list. And she just drops everything in there. Sometimes it's a Loom video, but it's a really flexible approach because first, we've got that trust from previous projects. Second, we have a really similar communication style in that we don't check in with each other for every minimal thing. This is something that was really important for me, and I think it was important for her as well, that she's got her designs. Obviously, the client signed off on that. But she always lets her client know, look, this is what we're proposing. It's a proposal of the design. When we're building and developing, things might shift. We might find, sometimes it's an extra brain on the project. Sometimes it's just when you get to the code, you're like, oh, that's not going to be efficient. It might not be efficient to code. It might not be efficient to maintain. There's always things that you haven't accounted for. So I love that because maybe she's got a great design. I'm like, actually, why don't we just do this and this? It's going to be quicker. It's going to be more efficient, X, Y, and Z. Or maybe it's just that specific line of code for that specific Shopify theme is going to be a nightmare. Let's do it differently.
Yeah.
And it's that trust and that feedback of, okay, I'm not going to like massacre her design, of course, but she trusts that I'm coming in, and if I'm making a suggestion, there's a good reason for it. At the same time, if I'm making a suggestion, she wants it, that's how it has to be, that's fine. But it's that open communication and also just like, we're in different time zones now, but knowing that, okay, if I'm really stuck on something today, maybe I'm just not in the mood or I can't get my head around something, I can leave it till the next day. She knows that I'm going to get it done. And that's again due to the fact that we've always had great communication, and it's just that history, that rapport.
Yeah, 100%. It's really interesting that you say that because Sarah, who's the next person I actually wanted to bring up and talk with, one of the first things that she had said to me is, I want to make collaborating work for everyone, but especially for the client. But I kind of come at it from both sides of like, sometimes you have to set expectations that if this goes awry, I'm okay with kind of letting the client go and maintaining the development or designer relationship, because that is going to benefit me and my business more long term. But sometimes that's just not the way it goes, right? And it really depends on your business and the relationships you need to prioritize for your business's success and your own mental health as well. But sometimes, because the designer often is booking the project, they're kind of leading the way with what relationship is actually going to be prioritized, if you will. That's sometimes the unfortunate truth. So Sarah, I kind of wanted to bring you on. If you can unmute, could you introduce yourself to the group, who you are, what your experience is?
Sure. I'm Sarah. I'm in Germany, and I'm a brand strategist and designer mostly, but I also create Squarespace sites. But everything else I outsource to developers, because I like to stay in my zone of genius, and I want my developers to stay in their zone of genius too.
Amazing. So I know that you and I kind of briefly talked about this kind of idea of unspoken expectations of when you're working with another developer. And I know that sometimes the weakness of collaborating is not speaking the quote unquote obvious expectations out and leaving it up to assumption. You know what they say when assuming makes an ass of both you and me. So can you tell me, as a designer offering website design, what are some of those unspoken expectations you have of your development partner when collaborating with you and your client?
Yes. So for me, the biggest thing is having a clear process and communication between each other. And I thought that this was kind of a given, but in reality, I actually found that what most developers that I worked with tried to do was to be so accommodating to me and my process that I felt like I had to micromanage, and that I felt like I had to give all the answers. Although that's not my zone of genius, I hire them because I don't know the different platforms, etc., and what's needed. And so sometimes it would go like this, like I would ask them, okay, when do you need this? How do you, for example, content, when do you need the content? And how do you need the content prepared? And they would be like, whatever works for you, whatever works for you. And like, okay, but that I'm trying to be helpful to both of us, to all of us. And I see myself in that position. I'm being the facilitator between the client and the developer. And I wouldn't say that I prioritize the client necessarily in that relationship, but obviously the client in the end is the one that needs to be happy. But I totally believe that the developer is the one who is doing the brunt of the work. So they need to have the process that works best for them and the structure that works best for them. And I'm the one who can facilitate that between the client, myself, and the developer. And when, like, I appreciate the sentiment of trying to be so accommodating, but actually that is just not working.
It doesn't. And really, it doesn't set, good confidence with the person you're working with that you do know what you're doing if you can't hold your own firm boundaries or show a level of organization and commitment to your own craft, because it actually creates no security for that person as well. So one of my coaches back in the day always said this to me: failure to prepare is preparing to fail. And if you don't create that pathway for that open dialogue with the designer or with the client, you as a developer, you might put yourself in that situation where you have to be accommodating because, maybe this is someone that you really see, wanting to work with long-term, or it's a dream project, or you're in a financial situation where you don't have the option of turning this down or not completing it to that designer's vision, and kind of your reputation and all of those messy pieces that go along with it. And I totally identify with that. I have been in the position of trying to be accommodating, leading with the over delivering and trying to wow the designer and client you're working with. but I've found that just is a breeding ground for resentment, creating a huge amount of risk and under delivering and risking your own business's financial health as well. So I wanted to invite Xanthi up now. And I mean, Xanthi, you required pretty much no introduction at this point, but if you can give the group who may not know you as well as I do, just a one-liner about yourself and your experience.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me. So I am Xanthi. I'm the co-founder of Osiera, which has sort of become an umbrella brand to 3 different sub-brands, so to speak, one of which is our creative agency, and we specialize in messaging, marketing, brand strategy, and website design. We also have an Airbnb property in Tulum, Mexico, which is the swim club, and an educational mentorship community, which we call the Table. So we work primarily remotely, and for all 3 avenues, we have brought on team members. So whether that is working like regularly with collaborators who we consider a part of our core team, or hiring out for development for various contract roles, we've sort of done it all from that perspective. And we would primarily focus on like the creative direction and design, and then bring people in for more of the execution piece. So that's the experience as far as collaboration goes.
Love it. And just as a polite plug to the Table, I'm in the Table and it's outstanding. So I definitely encourage you guys all to ask Xanthi about that or go check it out after this. But Xanthi, the reason I wanted you to be on here is because, you have so much experience on both sides of a relationship in one, factor or another, but you also have this really beautiful, opinion and position on setting boundaries and being compassionate to other people. I know that you've had talks previously about, compassionately ending conversations and designing a business that kind of suits your unique lifestyle. So as a developer who, you would be a great example of my like dream client if we were to work together. I am the type of person who would want to be as flexible and accommodating and also try and politely set boundaries in that relationship to have it lead somewhere more long-term. So I would love to hear your take on what is a way that you as a collaborator can communicate those boundaries while leaving room to be flexible.
For sure, for sure. Well, thank you for all the kind words. You're a dream collaborator for us too. So when it comes to the communication piece, honestly, Sarah had some really amazing points that I completely support in that sense, in terms of just making sure that you're able to set those expectations from the beginning. And for us, we always lean into communication first, like more is more. Say all the things, voice the concerns, voice previous experience, kind of come to the table ahead of the project. So before there is pressure, before there's timeline, before there's all these kind of external sources that could be forcing you to rush or accommodate or make changes to your process because you're feeling like the pinch to do that, have a conversation. And for us, when we talk about setting boundaries and being compassionate, a lot of times that's just a conversation between 2 human beings, like keeping it chill. It's not necessarily that there's a contract between you at that point. You're just sitting down and having a conversation about what are going to be your needs. So that's going to be a lot of self-advocacy, right? So explaining like, how do you work? What are your working hours? What are your communications expectations? If there's a time zone difference, and that's something we've navigated a lot because we have a collaborator in Australia. So navigating the the time zone difference like far in advance and sort of figuring out what's that system going to look like, and essentially just having this very kind of candid conversation about how you both work best, and then you come up together with a process. So it's not that I'm following their process, it's not that they're following my process, it's that together we've created a new process that supports us both, and we've discussed that in a way that feels open, relaxed, before deciding to move forward together, before signing the contract and saying, okay, we're doing this, and before the pressure of having a client coming in between is there. So I would say that's, number one is just making sure that conversation comes from a place that's low pressure, and there's the opportunity for you to collaborate even on just the process itself beyond the project work.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned like collaborating on process, because it can be some people's personality type to really take the reins and dictate the process. And it can also be completely unsupportive of your collaborators' working style, mental health, ways of coping with their own, unique worldview. And so I love that we've had this common thread of just how important communication is. And even as we're working remotely and in a social world, sometimes it's not an option to get on a phone call and hash it out. And I know from my personal experience, I tend to overinflate the emotional response of what I read in emails as being inflammatory language when it wasn't really intended to be. So Rebecca, I know that you use actually a really practical tip of kind of that proactive communication we were just talking about. Can you kind of give the audience your number one practical tip of getting into that headspace of proactive communication when things don't go the way you want them to be? Oh, Rebecca, I don't know if you're muted, but
okay. Yeah. Kind of piggybacking off what Xanthi said, compassion and empathy, number one. How do you want to be treated? If it were vice versa, what would I want to receive? And also, am I going to like feel as horrible receiving that as I am going to feel sending it? You always feel worse sending and communicating those things. But most people that we work with are not crazy, like actually crazy, and they will be human if you are human to them. So for me, Loom is the biggest thing. Typing a really long email, receiving a really long email, that's super anxiety inducing for me. And the whole thing of like miscommunicating and maybe they don't get it right. A Loom video saves me every single time.
Game
Do you want me to
changer.
give an example of what happened?
Yeah, I'd love that.
Okay. It was actually the very first project that Abby and I had like properly done together, and I was in the middle of moving, and I brought on a new team member to help with some overflow development things. I'd had a couple of good referrals, and so I was like, okay, I was pretty confident. I was like, I'm not going to hand off like the really deep stuff, but I need to get some things off my plate because my head was exploding. I was like, okay, this is safe. It wasn't. Nothing was safe. Nothing. Deadlines were like what was going to take her a day took like more than a week. It was super stressful, and I was dying inside when I realized and think about how I was going to tell Abby. Like I literally was crying. I could probably like feel my heart beating out my chest, and I just was like, okay, let's go back. What can I do? Nothing. What can I do from this point? I have to communicate it. That's what I would want. How can I do it succinctly and just explain myself? No excuses, because I think that's it. There weren't any excuses. I was really sorry. It wasn't entirely my fault, but yes, I am managing this for you, so I still need to step up and take responsibility. So it was a really hard email to write. It was short because I hate typing long emails. And I was dying until I got a reply from Abby, which was absolutely human. And she was like, don't worry, you have a couple more days. And that's it. That was it. It was over. But it was just that compassion, that empathy, and flipping the script.
Yeah. I love that you kind of mentioned like how emails are anxiety inducing. And I saw so many heads in the side going like, yep, been there.
Loom.
Yeah, Loom
Talking
is,
it out.
yeah, worth every penny, that piece of software. Absolutely. Sarah, this kind of reminds me of you mentioning, previous collaborators, developers have really left you feel like you're swimming. And actually, I really loved that specific adjective you used. It's difficult to have tight process or know what to expect. You touched on this a little bit, but would you be open to kind of sharing that experience you had in the past without naming names? And what were some of those client experience holes that you as a designer have seen from other developers you wish they had thought of before collaborating with you?
Sure. So again, it comes all down to communication and managing expectations. I feel like that's the common thread for all of us, but this is really the key component that I often felt was lacking. And I don't have horror stories per se. Like none of my collaborations were like nightmare collaborations that left me not sleeping at night or anything like that. But even though I collaborated with people that I truly admire and respect, I felt like this could be better. This could still be better. And for example, one key experience was when I booked several design days for a client with my developer. And the developer assured me, yes, this is plenty of time. We had booked in an extra half day to make sure everything would be done and everything was settled. And then my client got kind of nitpicky, like really unimportant things. Because clients, you know them, they don't know what's important and what's not. And so I tried to rein in the client and explain, listen, this is something that you can easily change yourself. We don't need the developer for this. Let's focus on the big picture stuff. But what actually happened then was the developer accommodated her over focusing on the big picture stuff. And she then went in and got all those small bits and bobs done, and we didn't get everything done. And then the client came back to me and was like, I feel like booking another design day with her feels like such a hidden cost. And yeah, she just wasn't happy, and I wasn't happy in that situation because I had tried so hard to rein in that situation and to keep everything on track and explaining the process again and the limited time frame.
Yeah,
And I felt like the developer was not on my side.
totally.
And it just felt like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that tendency of wanting to be accommodating, I think the common thread here is
Yes.
not only can it like give you a lot of risk, but it can also sometimes undermine the authority of your collaborator with the client if it's not handled appropriately and you're not telling the designer or the client, hey, I'm giving you a freebie right now. So like draw the boundary the first time you see that it's come up and has been crossed. Tippling, I wanted to circle back to you because things happen as the process unfolds, especially with custom development. And, just scope tends to balloon, things get uncovered. My personal number one must have when working with a designer as a developer with a designer is you always have to show me your mockups before the client sees anything. A lot of designers, however, miss this critical step. So I'd love to hear an experience that you've had of, scope ballooning beyond what anyone expected. Maybe some not so fun surprises came up at the end of the project because you as the developer weren't looped in. Can you give us some insight into that experience and what you learned from it?
Definitely. So really quickly, I just want to note when I kind of advocate for being involved up front, I don't necessarily mean that I have to have like a separate contract with the client. Like I can have a contract with the designer and the designer can have the total contract with the client as long as the client knows that there is some communication between like me and the client. And the reason for this is my example problem. As sites get larger and more comprehensive and they just have more and more needs, there tends to be issues where I need to communicate with the client directly as well as another third party. For example, we had a client who uses Recharge, which is a subscription platform on Shopify. And last year, Shopify upgraded their platform to Shopify 2.0. Well, Recharge was delayed in doing like their upgrade to 2.0. And so we had this project where the designer designed the product page. Great. It didn't include subscription up front. Okay. But at the end, the client wanted a very customized Recharge subscription integration. And I had to work one-on-one with Recharge, like Recharge head development, in order to develop this very specific widget for this very specific case scenario for a brand new custom 2.0 website. And if that communication had to go through the designer, like it would have been a complete nightmare just because of the tech speak and also like I had to work directly with Recharge. And if the client, our client, didn't know that I was even involved and some random person just starts talking to their Recharge rep, I mean, it would have just been like a disaster. So it just ballooned into like this very complicated situation. And the fact that the designer could just say, you know what, like, this is what the client wants to do. And I said, okay, great. I'm going to build this as a separate project than the website build itself, because who knows where this is going to end up, basically. Like, Recharge and I had to build it together. And now, like, all the other Recharge stores or subscription stores are going to use what we built. But like, we had to do that, and it took, way longer than just building the site. So,
and all the
was,
unseen
yeah,
costs too, right? Supporting that client, documenting it, them being a boomerang in your inbox, all that stuff. So that brings me to my last question for Xanthi, because sometimes, no matter how good your intentions are and how much you try and communicate, relationships sometimes just devolve, and it's always everyone's, last resort to have to cut ties with a relationship. But before it gets to that point, Xanthi, I would love to know kind of what are your tips for kind of salvaging that relationship before it gets to that point? And if you can't salvage it, what does compassionately cutting ties actually mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough one, right? It's like difficult conversations, but ultimately, the best piece of advice I can give when it comes to this is it's never going to help the situation to bite your tongue, like to continue to push things down and ignore your intuition or let your standards go by the wayside. If you feel like an expectation is being broken or a boundary is being pushed, or for whatever reason in your gut, you're like, this is not going the direction I want it to go, you need to find the courage to speak up. And it's super difficult to do that. So I have so much compassion on the topic for that conversation. And what we've even sort of done over the course of our experience is kind of created canned conversations and little kind of like cataloged and documented conversations that have gone really well, or ways that we've delivered criticisms that have gone well, or that we felt were articulated in a really good way, to sort of keep those on hand for when we do need to have those conversations, and sort of knowing what those very specific phrasing that you can use that's compassionate and sort of takes into account their experience while at the same time advocating for yourself. I think that you mentioned it earlier, but like being prepared, especially when you have to have a hard conversation, is key. Not going into it with a hot head, not going into it in the moment where you're feeling really stressed out or angry, because that happens as well. We get frustrated, that's human. And being able to find a way to kind of articulate it in a kind manner when something has gone wrong. So that's the piece of salvaging the relationship, is to be honest, because it's such an awful feeling when you are in a collaboration and someone cuts it off and just says like, yeah, this isn't working for me, but you never have the opportunity to know why or to correct your behavior, right? So you owe it to the person you're collaborating with to be open with them about when an expectation is not being met, and give them the chance to kind of change course correct, I should say. But then of course, if that doesn't happen, then we're in the point of needing to cut ties. And when we say compassionately cut ties, we mean ending a relationship on a positive note, right? It's really just, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the most positive. There maybe is going to be a bad taste in someone's mouth because they were expecting a paycheck or any number of things, right? But at the end of the day, when you are cutting ties compassionately, you're doing so from a perspective of understanding maybe why things went wrong, taking accountability to what your role could have been in that as well, which 9 times out of 10, it's communication, right? It's that maybe we didn't communicate the expectation early enough, maybe we didn't catch it early enough because we were overwhelmed. And I do find that's something that sort of plagues us in that situation where we are hiring out because we're overwhelmed, and it makes it even more difficult for us to manage. So taking some accountability, taking some responsibility, and communicating that in a way that is concise. You want to make sure that you are absolutely saying this relationship is over, or we're not revisiting this for X amount of time, or whatever, like making sure that whatever it is, that the outcome is very clear, so no one is left wondering. Explain why that is the case, and then offering if the situation calls for it, sort of offering an alternative option to continue to connect. Like, I'll continue to support you in this way, or I would love to revisit this when something else has shifted, or leaving that open door if you feel called to do that, but absolutely not leaving that open door if you don't feel called to do that, because that's misleading as well. So you want to make sure that it's really honest, really open, really clear, and not going into over explaining or defensiveness or anything like that, just straight shooting.
So good. So many practical tidbits. I have to watch this recording back myself, because I unfortunately was in the position to end a relationship with a designer, and it didn't really end in the best way. And it actually makes me really, really upset that it didn't. That's just the unfortunate humanness of sometimes business doesn't go the way you want it to. But I do want to make sure everyone has ample opportunity to connect with each other. So we're going to go into the breakout rooms, and you have all been pre-assigned a breakout room. I encourage everyone here to be an active participant in the discussions. We've had so much talk about communicating, so please use your voice, communicate. Be cognizant that there's 10 to 15 people per room. So leave opportunity for other people's voices to be heard. My pro tip is flash your microphone in the room if you have something to say, and chime in. So I'm going to start the breakout rooms, but Xanthi, if you can give us one word of wisdom, what is your one tip on cultivating a genuine connection with people that could lead to an amazing collaborative future?
Of course, of course. So I really don't believe in creating a hierarchy within a team that hides imperfection. So for me, it's really being a leader. We have to be brave on behalf of our teams, right? There's nothing worse than a boss that's sort of constantly complaining or being super negative, but it's also so essential to admit when we've made an error or when we've misjudged something. And I think, again, that's taking responsibility, being accountable. And that's something that I value not only most in myself, but expect from collaborators. And that has been actually one of the things that has been kind of like a make or break in some relationships we've had, is when the accountability piece isn't there, when someone kind of makes a mistake, but they're not willing to admit that, or they get defensive, or the response just isn't really coming from that place that feels like, okay, we can all just step up and admit that we're human beings who sometimes, F things up. And I really think that that's where you can build trust with people. And that's how you can create a community that feels like everyone's sort of playing for the same side and we're all in it together, because we're being accountable. And that would definitely be number one piece of advice,
Yeah.
100%.
And even before you work with that person, vulnerability, I think, is always the easy shortcut to genuine connection. So I'll leave it at that. And I'm going to start the breakout rooms, and we will kind of come back in around 10 or less minutes. And then we'll kind of wrap everything up. So I'm going to open up all of the rooms. Xanthi, were you able to get into a room?